He wasn't the hero we deserved. He was the hero we thought we needed.
Wait, hold on. You tried to do this team report with that, Jeremy. We talked about this, all right? I thought we had a plan. I was just going to the bathroom for like 2 seconds, and now you're already just going Batman on me again. I thought we had the Batman out of our systems, okay? Let's just get back on the team report, and I'm sorry you guys had to see that. Let's just move on, okay?
I don't recall agreeing to giving up on Batman, but whatever. So this is the team report for the team I and Ashton and Chuppa, actually, used at the North American International Championships. And we also used it at a couple of events prior to that, namely 2 regionals, Virginia regionals and Madison regionals, and 1 mid-season showdown. So the team you see right now isn't actually the team we used, but it's the first version of the version of the team that Ashton actually handed me.
Yeah, thankfully, we never actually used this team at anything, because I don't know how it looks to you, but personally, I would not trust that team with anything. I wouldn't trust it with money. I mean, I wouldn't take it to an event. I just wouldn't feel safe. You know, it doesn't look like it'd protect me at all.
I mean, Ashton just doesn't go out with this type of team. He wouldn't be seen in public with it. And frankly, if you've taken a moment to look at this Drifblim's EV spread, you should not take it in public either. I don't know where this EV spread came from. It's terrible. In the later versions of the team, we revised it, but the important part of this version of the team is seeing how it fits together and what valuable insight it has into the team we eventually ended up with.
I mean, so one of the things is we were kind of stuck for a bit on, like, you know, Tailwind is such a good option, but, like, every Pokemon that gets Tailwind is just hot garbage. And we really wanted something that was more consistency in bulk while also being fast enough with a little bit of offensive pressure mixed in, because prior to this, you know, don't tell anybody, but we were trying to Mandibuzz a little bit, and the only thing it had going for it was the ability to do damage to Metagross. So we were really looking for something that could do damage to Metagross, be a little bulky, and be fast. And jokingly, I go, oh hey, I got this great Pokemon. It's never been used before. It's a Drifblim with a Psychic Seed, like super, you know, great innovation in the format. And so I just pulled this team out of, I have no idea where I found it. It was like the beginning of my builder. And it's pretty bad. I don't think, the only thing that has not changed at all is this Tapu Lele. Or if you look at it, you know, you got same Tapu Lele, just the Life Orb, you got the Modest, you got the Attacks. And that thing's great. Can't go wrong with Lele. I personally think it's probably the best Tapu, but don't quote me on that. As we've already mentioned, this Drifblim is like really bad. It had one too many speed, or one too many speed stat. The HP, it was just inoptimal. Like you can't even make that one up. It was just terrible. The Metagross, I think we were pretty sold on those moves. I don't think there was a time where we really wanted Ice Punch, but the spread we definitely changed. The Kartana, just kind of set up. I guess I don't know. I didn't really make this team, so there wasn't much of a process. I just kind of found it. But this Stone Edge, come on, who put Stone Edge there? Like what's going on with that? And then this was a Charizard, and yes, there was a Mega Charizard Y, Sun, and yes, we had Rain Dance. I don't know. It just existed.
This was very definitely a first version of the team. There were second versions. There were better versions. This is the version we actually wound up running at the Mid-Season Showdown and at the NAIC. You may have heard some rumors that at Virginia Regionals we ran a Heat Ran that may or may not have been a Salt Fest. Those are categorically false allegations. I can tell you that right now. Anyway, let's focus on what we have right here. Drifblim spread is actually relatively simple. Because of the natural high base HP, it just makes more sense to invest in the defenses. It makes the calcs better. Specifically what this does is it allows you to live Jolly Metagross's Ice Punch, and it gives you enough special bulk to take Thunderbolts out of terrain if they're Life Orb, and sometimes you can even take them in terrain if they are Life Orb because of the Psychic Seed boost. The speed allows you to outspeed Ludicolo in Rain, which allows you to get off a Tailwind before it can Hydro Vortex you, or if you manage to chip them earlier in the game, you can get off a Shadow Ball.
Or if they think you have Sunny Day, you fool somebody so hard they don't even bring the Rain option. I'm looking at you, Carson.
It has happened before. The Lele, as mentioned, didn't change at all. it's always been fulfilling the same role of reasonably fast, extreme damage, and this set just does that better than anything else. Metagross did retain the same moves. They were all really too good to give up. Iron Head's a consistent stab that Metagross will always have no matter who's running it. Stomping Tantrum is pretty essential in a meta where Incineroar is literally everywhere, and it's also good coverage against random fire types, notably Heatran, although you do have to be wary of the fact that they are going to have a Shuka Berry and they are going to survive. And then Zen Headbutt really capitalizes on Tapu Lele's Psychic Terrain and the Tailwind that Drifloon provides to either get KOs on certain Pokemon that don't have a lot of bulk, or to pressure massive damage on even the bulkiest of Pokemon in the format. EV Spread is also relatively straightforward. The speed stat allows you to outspeed Tapu Lele by 2 points, which means 1, you're outspeeding Pokemon that have EV'd themselves to outspeed Tapu Lele by 1 point, and modest Tapu Lele, just for reference. And 2, you also outspeed Neutral Nature Max Speed Togedemaru and Mimikyu, which is kind of nifty. The HP and Special Defense means you always live Timid Gengar Shadow Ball, and inadvertently gives you a 50% chance to live Standard Coco Gigavolt Havoc and Modest Gengar Shadow Ball, assuming their max investment. If Modest Gengar has less investment than that, say 200-ish investment, Shadow Ball is a roll, but it will be significantly in your favor, and that was mostly good enough for us. The one remaining stat that's important is attack. You have slightly more attack than your average Jolly Metagross. The main thing this allows you to do is if you connect. In terrain, Zen Headbutt will KO No Bulk Landorus the majority of the time. Unfortunately, it is not a guaranteed KO, even on No Bulk. So you have to be careful going for that. Although Tapu Lele's Psychic does always KO non-Assault Vest Landorus. And traditionally, if you're trying to get a KO on Landorus, you have Lele on the field at some point in the game and you're able to put on that pressure. Amoonguss was actually kind of Ashton's invention. This is the exact same spread he ran on his Amoonguss on his Sydney team, which he then proceeded to make finals of 2 different regionals with. So it was an okay team. We have a Wiki Berry on Showdown. For some reason, I had an Aguav Berry at the actual event.
No idea where that berry came from. Disgusting.
Yeah, I don't either. The moveset is very straightforward. One note I would like to make is that I am a staunch defender of Clear Smog as Amoonguss's best move.
Me too.
It actually did win me a game in Game 2 against Melvin, Day 2 against Melvin Ke, where his win con was setting up a Curse-Lax, and the ability to just remove its boosts just swung the game in my favor. The EV Spread allows you to take a Metagross's Zen Headbutt outside of terrain, with a special defense jump after that to take special moves like Heat Waves and Waterium Z's a little better. Landorus is the other Pokemon that, very much like Tapu Lele, has simple EV Spread, simple moveset, performs a very simple role. It's relatively fast Intimidate support that is capable of removing opposing threats like Incineroar or like Mega-Gengar with strong Tectonic Rages. Swords Dance can capitalize on defensive play when you have Tailwind set up. And just a note here, leading Drifblim Lele, and then immediately turn 1 switching Lele out into Landorus is really, really nice because it allows you to bring Lele back in later in the battle, and so you reassert terrain control. While Drifblim is more likely to survive that turn 1 because of the Intimidate support, and then you're able to fire off Earthquakes immediately afterwards, so that's really nice. Adamant was selected for more damage, and we never really felt like we needed speed. And that brings us to our very last member of the team.
He's the best.
Yeah.
Absolutely the best.
We spent a long period of time trying to figure out what we wanted in the slot. We always knew we wanted a fire type, but we weren't certain exactly what it would be.
We did actually have a dark period of time where an Electros did inhabit that slot, but
it was an Assault Vest Electros. We thought it would beat Rain. It did not beat Rain. Because in an ideal world, we wanted a fire type that would beat Rain. And eventually we came to the realization that that just wasn't going to happen, but we had to pick and choose what this last slot would be doing. and so we wanted an answer to like Ferrothorn, Celesteela, opposing bulky steel types that we might struggle to deal with otherwise. And Rotom-Heat just really did seem like the best option for that. The one other note I would like to make is I personally wanted this last slot to be pretty decent against Finny, and especially I wanted it to be good against Incineroar. And most fire types really do not do well against Incineroar because, I mean, sure, they're going to resist Flare Blitz, but they tend to take too much damage from knockoff. And so that's a large part of the reason why we opted for the Electrium Z, so knockoff would be doing less damage. It wouldn't get the 1.5 times boost. Electrium Z was also very nice for putting immense pressure on Tapu Fini, and against certain Incineroar, you could go for a Thunderbolt into Electrium to KO them while only letting Incineroar get off one attack, either a relatively weak knockoff against Rotom, or one Flare Blitz against whatever else you would have on the team. One more note on that point. Assuming opposing Incineroar are 252 attack adamant, this Amoonguss lives their Flare Blitz the majority of the time. It's about a 30% roll for them to KO you, and standard Incineroar tend to have a little bit less attack than that, so in the majority of cases, this Amoonguss should live Flare Blitzes. With that said, I don't think I've ever had to survive a Flare Blitz, because I'm just kind of unlucky like that.
It's kind of weird because I do most of the time survive the Flare Blitz with very generous amounts of HP. So hearing that is just kind of weird. Different perspective from the same team, especially the same EU spreads. It's just kind of weird.
It really depends on the type of team you're playing against. One of the Flare Blitzes I died to over the weekend was Daniel Thorpe's Flare Blitz, which was on his Hard Trick Room team, where it does frankly make sense that he had a max attack Incineroar. So you do kind of have to eyeball the opposing team and figure out how much attack investment they're likely to have. And one last note on the Rotom-Heat. Ally Switch.
Best move.
It was actually a pretty good move. At the NAIC, it was pretty underwhelming for me. It did put in work Game 2 of Finals, but besides that, I never really used it throughout the tournament. The few instances in which I did, it was underwhelming. Although, I still do think it was the best option on Rotom-Heat. At Madison Regionals in particular, where we ran Rotom-Heat, Ally Switch saved me or won me 2 or 3 rounds, I think, which for a single move is pretty incredible. And the main reason behind Ally Switch is not only does it have amazing synergy with Metagross, so you can jump in front of Dark-type attacks like Knockoff or Flare Blitz or Tectonic Rages, as an example, or Gigavolt Havocs, for that matter. Rotom-Heat has a lot of resistances. But it also forces mind games, and Rotom-Heat doesn't really have any moves it wants to be running in that slot. Volt Switch, Electro Web, Will-O-Wisp are all potential options, but all of them tend to be underwhelming. Volt Switch, it's not bad, but it's not great. Electro Web, I mean, most of the time, the thing you want to be slowing down is an opposing Landorus, and Electro Web doesn't help much with that. And Will-O-Wisp is just kind of mediocre, A, in a format where Tapu Fini is everywhere, and B, when you already have it elsewhere on the team.
Yeah. I think it could have been considered. Will-O-Wisp could have been considered in that slot if we did not have it on Drifblim, but just the sheer fact of already having it on a Pokemon, and having something which now we consider to be a better move on the Rotom, it just didn't make any sense.
And already, with Will-O-Wisp on Drifblim, there were a couple of games where I really wanted to burn him on and then put it to sleep with a Amoonguss. And triple status on a team, it just doesn't make that much sense, especially when this team does tend to be more offensive. In most cases, you want to be aiming for a KO instead of aiming for a status effect on an opposing Pokemon. And Ally Switch potentially allowed you to get off more attacks with whatever was next to Rotom. So it was a really good momentum move. And so the last thing we want to talk about is a couple of the potential leads this team has in this that we would commonly use. So, Ashton?
And, one of my favorite leads with this team is Metagross and Amoonguss. And I know what you're thinking. Doesn't Charizard exist? And I mean, you're right. Typically you couldn't lead this into a Charizard team, but just imagine that there is no Charizard. Even in a world where Incineroar exists, if your opponent does not have a Charizard facing down your team, the odds of both of these Pokemon being threatened by a single Pokemon that is not Incineroar and even Incineroar to an extent, while we live the Flare Blitz and also put on pressure with Stomping Tantrum, is not too threatening to this pair. They really work well together due to the fact of Metagross, especially upon lead, cannot be intimidated. So common, counter leads to Metagross being Incineroar or Landorus are immediately pressured, either with an OHKO from, potentially the Zen Headbutt and Terrain, or a 2-shot from the Stomping Tantrum, or maybe even you just protect Metagross and Spore something just to gain so much immediate momentum. It's kind of like a very situational lead, but there are so many situations where it works that I found myself leading this almost all the time, especially versus Gengar Como teams, because as we noted, we do take a Shadow Ball, and most people would either go for the Shadow Ball and notice that we live and most likely lose their Gengar in return, or some people would even be too afraid to attack the Metagross because he's going to protect, obviously, because I one-shot him with a Shadow Ball. And as we do not die to that Shadow Ball, it was very easy just to leave it unprotected, try to go for a Spore and a Zen Headbutt, see how much I can get out of a turn, kind of, gauge how offensive my opponent is, and it was just a very, very good game one lead at the very least, just to gauge how my opponent's going to try to play around such an offensive threat and such a defensive threat at the same time.
The other thing is, if you lead these two, you have a lot of switching potential. Not only do you have the mind game of, I protect one, I protect the other, and attack or Spore, you are also constantly threatening the ability to switch Metagross out into Lele, reset Terrain, and then Spore even if they have Koko or Finny on the field. At the same time, you can pull a Mungus into Lele to get boosted Zen Headbutts turn 1. You just have all of the cards in your hand, and the pressure is really on your opponent to figure out what you're going to do and accurately respond to it, which for a lot of teams is just incredibly difficult. Now, Drift Lele. Drift Lele isn't a lead you go for as often as you probably think looking at the team. It's traditionally for when they either just don't have answers to a Life Orb Lele. If you happen to run into a weird top of the list non-hard trick room team, this would be a great lead, but those are very strict conditions that are almost never met in this format, and correspondingly, this lead isn't quite as common as you might think. Most of the time when I led this, it was into opposing Charizard teams, in part because Drifloon had a Rain Dance, but also because setting up an early Tailwind against Charizard teams can be incredibly valuable. Tapu Lele threatens huge amounts of damage onto Charizard, potentially even OHKOing it if you have terrain control, and between Will-O-Wisp and Life Orb Psychic OHKOing Landorus, this pair does exceedingly well against the traditional Charizard-Landorus lead combination. That was the main thing I let it into. It's a general, I'm not quite certain what my opponent's going to lead, but I think this can probably run over them. And especially in the early rounds, it's good for that. Although, a word of warning on that point, in my very first round of Madison Regionals, I saw my opponent's team, and he didn't really have much of an Amoonguss answer, so I was like, because he's got a Porygon 2 Araquanid, and Amoonguss is scary for both of those. I was like, he won't lead them. I can probably lead Drifloon Lele and run over him. Well, I led Drifloon Lele into Amoonguss Araquanid, or into Porygon 2 Araquanid, excuse me, and I was like, well, this isn't great. Everything's bad. I don't have any real options here. So I wound up taunting the Porygon 2 and losing my Lele to a Liquidation. And that's really the drawback of this lead, in very sharp contrast to Metagross and Mungus, where both of the Pokemon you have are very bulky, very defensive, while still threatening offense and having a lot of switching potential. When you lead Drifloon Lele, you tend to kind of be all in on the lead, and so you have to be very certain that it is in fact the call, because if you lead this into an unfavorable matchup, the amount of momentum you lose is pretty large, and recovering momentum with this team, while possible, tends to be rather difficult.
One of the big things, Sam, actually, that I'm realizing about Drifloon is, what some people might not realize is, you don't always have to lead your Drifloon, or if you do lead your Drifloon, you don't always have to lead your Lele. And while that might sound weird and kind of counterproductive, because the whole idea is just to get your Psychic Seed boost and then your Unburden, not leading one or the other gives you more of a late game option where you can come in after, maybe you match their Tailwinds turn 1 and Drifloon takes a ton of damage, but you get to switch out. And then later in the game, you bring in your low health Drifloon that now gets the Unburden and can set up a very free, because you're so fast now, late game Tailwind that really positions you for more of a, end game win con that you can be thinking about instead of just trying to lead Drifloon into, with a late into a team.
Having Drifloon in the back is really complicated, but it can be very nice. If you can ensure you have terrain control, so your Psychic Seed does activate, it's a guaranteed Tailwind in basically any circumstance, unless either Trick Room are up or they have some very fast mons under their own Tailwind. And getting a late game Tailwind, if you have a Metagross or a Landorus or a Lele, can very easily win you games. So it's definitely an option to consider.
And this lead, it may look like Meta Lele. I mean, obviously, like you have two Psychic types, gives you the terrain, and they both have Psychic moves, so like they've got to be good together, right? And I mean that may be enough justification to lead them in certain scenarios, but just beyond that, you can look at this as a sort of lead where maybe your goal is not to just take out knockouts because they have no Psychic switch-ins. It could be to try to find which of them can be more of an offensive presence, and the other one can try to pivot back out to be more of a late game cleanup, because both of these Pokemon are very good at immediately pressuring while also cleaning up in the late game just because they exist and they're fast and they do damage. So leading both of them into certain teams will give you the upper hand of just having both of them in the game while also having them both as a lead. And another thing, one of the matchups that is kind of iffy with this team, and I know this is going to sound incredibly bad, one of the matchups we have a little bit of trouble with is the Chalk team that's been running around. And that may sound a little bad, but realistically in the matchup, our goal is to try to get one read right. And if we do that, it kind of just spirals out of control for them. And the combination of any attack from Metagross, may it be a Stomping Tantrum or Zen Headbutt or something, plus Lele's most likely Psychic because you have Terrain up, usually takes out any Pokemon on that team except Crest. So this is usually our go-to lead against Chalk, because if you can just take out one of their Pokemon turn 1, even if they get up Trick Room, even if they get up Tailwind, whatever they've got, it just allows you to take a KO while being able to keep your bulkier Pokemon like the Amoonguss or the Landorus in the back to pivot into later after, trying to realize which Pokemon you've KO'd and now what you need to preserve to win the endgame. So even though it is kind of a bit of a shaky matchup versus Chalk, it tends to be our best lead.
I mean, a lot of people often think of Drifloon Tapu Lele as an extremely hyper-aggressive lead. I honestly think Metagross Tapu Lele is the most aggressive lead this team could put up, especially against slower teams, potentially Trick Room teams. The amount of offense these two put out at the same time is just basically unrivaled, and it really can run over unprepared teams. And the flip side of that is if you lead this and immediately lose terrain to an opposing Tapu Fini, and they have something next to that Tapu Fini, let's say an Incineroar, then once again you kind of get put on the back foot, and you have to make defensive switches, which aren't great. So this is kind of all or nothing. I'm going in, I'm going to try to take KOs, I need to keep up pressure, and if that doesn't work out for me, there are going to be problems. And then the last lead we'd like to highlight is Landorus and Amoonguss. This was what initially I thought was our best lead against Chalk, but upon further consideration, it's much, much, much too susceptible to Cresselia. I didn't use this lead all that much. In certain situations, it's nice because you protect your Amoonguss with Landorus's Intimidate, allowing you to get off spores more easily, and you always have the ability to protect Amoonguss and set up a Swords Dance on Landorus. So it's not just one Pokemon providing threat lead. Both of the Pokemon are offensive, or in Amoonguss' case, supportive threats. The other thing I would like to mention here is that Amoonguss and Landorus together are just such flexible Pokemon that they can work in matchups you wouldn't even begin to imagine they would be effective in. The best example of this was round 6 of Nationals, where I was playing a Mega Swampert Rain team piloted by Stephen Brown, Pyromaniac. And the way I actually went about winning that match after I lost Game 1 was I realized that because he had Celesteela and Swampert on the field for most of Game 1, that if I could get Landorus in and get off and Intimidate while I had Amoonguss on the field, and then if I could proceed to Rage Powder and set up Swords Dances, his team actually struggled a lot to deal with that because although his team did have a Ludicolo, he wasn't bringing it, so he didn't have a way to hit Landorus effectively around Rage Powder. So, Amoonguss's extreme natural bulk, complemented by Intimidate, the redirection, complemented by Swords Dance, was enough to really just soften up Steven's team to the point where in both Game 2 and Game 3, I ended up with a +4 Landorus firing off a single target Rock Slide against an opposing Celesteela that in both cases did around 80% damage, which is just kind of insane to think about. But both of these Pokemon are very independently strong, and by playing them well together, either as a lead or by getting them on the field at the same time at some point throughout a match, you can really leverage their individual and combined strength to run away with games.
I think that about sums it up. I wouldn't say it's, too much of a lead for me, but this is usually when I look at a team, I can say, okay, well, maybe I lead Metagross and Amoonguss, and the goal is Metagross gets a KO, maybe, does a little bit of chip damage, and then I can easily pivot into the Landorus while providing the protection, like you said, with the Intimidate for the Amoonguss, to gain a little bit of leverage with a Spore while bringing in Landorus. And the next turn, I know they'll only have one threat, so I can very easily either Rage Powder, Swords Dance, or maybe if that Pokemon doesn't even threaten me that much, I can just Swords Dance Spore again. And the amount of, like mid-game leverage you can get with these two Pokemon is really my favorite part about what they would be doing together.
Okay, and that is the team report. Please be sure to like, comment, and...
No. Okay. No. I thought we said we weren't selling out this early, all right? We're trying to be the channel the kids can look up to, okay?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I would like to bring to your attention that we're inevitably going to sell out at some point, and if we're going to sell out at some point, we might as well sell out early. So...
That's true.
Please, if you like anything we have to say, if you would like to use the team, leave a like, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, and as 2 notes here. In the description, we are going to have a paste bin of this team for showdown play and a link to a QR code you can use to play with this team on BattleSpot. It is exactly the team you see right here, and so you don't have to go through the trouble of trying to recreate it on Showdown or in-game. The other note is going to be a note about this channel. Most of the content we put out on this channel will not actually be team reports like this, although if in the future Ashton or I ever do well at anything ever again and decide to make a team report, we will probably put that out here.
So basically you'll get a team report almost every event, let's be real, come on.
Maybe. But the main goal of this channel really is to provide a resource for newer players who have played the main series games but have never seriously delved into competitive, so they don't really have doubles experience, they don't really have singles experience. The goal of this channel is to give them a starting place to go to and see how to approach competitive Pokemon, to see the resources available, the different YouTubers, the different websites, all of the different tools available to improve at the game, and ideally to encourage them to actually build a team of their own and go out to events, and in our modest, humble goal, to grow the community and help in any small way we can. So you can also leave likes for that.
All right, so yeah, I guess that's all. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back with another video shortly.
See you next time.